always thought it would be the cold that finally got me, that brittle Ohio winter wind sneaking into my bones. But it wasn't ice or age that brought me to my knees. It was a patch of damp grass behind my own house. The roses had been thirsty, the blooms drooping their tired heads, so I slipped on my old gardening gloves and set out to prune them, just like I had every spring since Frank passed away. The sky was soft with clouds that morning, the air just warm enough to make me sweat under my cardigan. I remember thinking how the roses didn't care if anyone noticed them. They just kept blooming, whether admired or ignored. I was crouched down near the trellis when my foot slipped on a slick patch of mud. My legs folded beneath me in a way no legs should. There was a crack, a wet, nauseating sound. My body jolted sideways, and before I could cry out, I was on the ground, cheek pressed to the damp earth. My heart pounded so loud I thought the neighbors might hear it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Pain flared up my side and radiated through my wrist. I tried to roll over and nearly blacked out. I don't know how long I lay there, counting the seconds, my breath ragged. I thought of Frank. I thought of my children. I thought of how this was exactly the sort of moment I'd always been there to help them through. Splintered bones, sudden emergencies, life coming apart in an instant. When Evan broke his collarbone falling off his bike, I held him all the way to the hospital, promising it would be okay. When Rachel went into labor 3 weeks early, I packed her bag, drove her to the ER, and held her hand through every contraction. But when it was my turn to need someone, I was alone. Finally, I managed to drag myself onto my knees, gasping. My vision blurred as I crawled across the grass to the porch steps. Every inch felt impossible. When I reached the door, I used my good hand to pull myself up, bracing against the frame. I sat on the stoop, dizzy and cold. My phone was in my pocket. I pressed the screen and Evan's picture popped up. His smiling face from the day he opened his little coffee shop, the one I'd funded with the last of Frank's life insurance. My thumb hovered over the call button. I didn't want to feel like a burden. But as another wave of pain crashed through me, I realized I didn't have a choice. I tapped the icon. The phone rang twice before a hollow voice informed me, "The number you have dialed is unavailable. Please leave a message." My stomach turned. I tried again, thinking I'd misheard. Same message. So I called Rachel. Her face smiled up at me too. The day she moved into the house I helped her buy. My hand trembled as I tapped the screen. This time, I didn't even get a ring, just an automated recording. "This caller has blocked your number." It took a moment to register. Blocked. My own daughter had blocked me. I tried her husband's phone. Also blocked. I don't know if the cold I felt then was from the wind or something deeper, a kind of freezing loneliness that reached into the marrow of my bones. I sat there, phone clutched against my chest, listening to the robins singing in the trees like nothing was wrong. The sky had turned a blameless blue. I thought of every Christmas morning I'd stayed up all night assembling toys, every birthday cake I'd baked from scratch, every rent payment I'd quietly covered. And here I was, 72 years old, stranded on my own porch, too proud to call 911, too humiliated to scream for help. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Kent, who finally saved me. She was walking her little pug, Winston, when she spotted me slumped against the doorframe. Her eyes widened and she rushed up the steps. "Margaret, oh dear Lord, are you hurt?" I nodded, too exhausted to explain. She didn't ask questions, just called her son, who helped lift me into her car and drove me to urgent care. They set my wrist in a brace and gave me something for the pain. When the nurse asked if there was anyone to call, I opened my mouth, but no words came out. No names, because there was no one. Later, when I was back home, the adrenaline long gone, I sat in my kitchen staring at my phone. The tea I'd made that morning sat cold and untouched. My reflection in the window looked older than I'd ever seen it, some weary woman I almost didn't recognize. I thought I'd reached the worst moment of my life when Frank left, but I was wrong. It wasn't losing him that hurt most. It was realizing that the children we raised together had decided I was no longer worth picking up the phone for. I don't remember falling asleep that night, only waking in the darkness to find my wrist throbbing and my heart feeling even more bruised. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, cataloging every time I'd ever tried to make things easier for them. Evan, with his grand ambitions and endless shortfalls, and Rachel, who could never quite keep her life in order, but never seemed to question why it was always me who made up the difference. In the morning, I brewed coffee with one hand and set my phone on the table. I stared at it like it might apologize. It didn't. It just sat there, black screen reflecting my lined face. Part of me wanted to pretend the whole thing had been some mistake, a glitch, a misunderstanding. Maybe Rachel had meant to block a telemarketer and hit my name instead. Maybe Evan's voicemail was just bad service. But deep down, I knew better. My children didn't block me by accident. They blocked me because they'd decided I was inconvenient. Still, I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. I sat down and composed an email. Short, factual, nothing that could be called emotional. Dear Evan and Rachel, I had a fall yesterday and was unable to reach you. I'm home now, but I have a sprained wrist. I hope all is well. Love, Mom. I read it 3 times, wondering if it sounded needy. I didn't care. I hit send. Then I left a voicemail for Evan, trying to keep my voice steady. Hi, sweetheart. Just wanted to check in. I'm okay now, but I could have used a hand yesterday. Hope you're all right. Call me when you can. I left a similar one for Rachel. I waited. The day passed in silence, broken only by the whir of my old refrigerator and the hum of cars on the street. At noon, I made myself lunch, peanut butter toast because it was all I could manage one-handed. At 3, I checked my email again. Nothing. By dinner, my heart had grown raw from hoping. I thought about the way Evan used to call me 3 times a week when he first moved out, about how Rachel would show up on my porch in tears when she and her husband fought. I remembered how proud I was to be the person they always called first, the one who could fix anything. Apparently, I was no longer useful enough to answer. That evening, I logged onto Facebook, even though I knew I'd regret it. Sure enough, there they were. Evan had posted a photo of his family at the lake, everyone smiling, glasses raised in a toast. The caption read, "Grateful for my tribe. No drama, just love." No drama. I closed my laptop so fast it rattled the table. I swallowed against the burn in my throat. I told myself I wouldn't cry. I was too old to cry over people who couldn't be bothered to care. But when the house went dark and the quiet pressed in, I did cry. I cried for the girl I used to be, the one who thought being a good mother meant never letting anyone see how much it hurt. I must have drifted to sleep in the chair because the next thing I knew, the dawn was bleeding through the curtains. My wrist ached in its brace, but my heart felt different. Empty, maybe, but in a way that left room for something else. I'd spent so long believing that my children's love was unconditional, that no matter how much they took, there would always be some part of them that remembered all the nights I stayed up rocking them, all the scraped knees I kissed, all the sacrifices I made without complaint. But I saw the truth now. They didn't block me by accident. They did it because they could. Because somewhere along the way, they decided I was only as valuable as what I could do for them. I thought about every time Rachel called me in tears over the mortgage, and I wired money before she could even finish asking. I thought about how Evan never paid me back for the thousands I lent him to keep his shop open. How I never said a word, never made them feel guilty, because that's what mothers do. We love without ledger sheets. But there's a difference between loving someone and letting them hollow you out. Around mid-morning, my neighbor's daughter, Chelsea, stopped by with groceries and a shy smile. She said her mom had told her what happened. I thanked her, blinking back tears I didn't want to explain. After she left, I sat in the kitchen, a listless quiet settling around me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I wanted to try again, not this time. I picked up my phone, stared at Evan's smiling face on the screen, and deleted his contact. Then I did the same with Rachel's. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in years. That night, as the sun dipped behind the roof lines, I whispered something out loud to no one. I'm done begging to be loved. And I knew I meant it. The morning after I deleted their numbers, I woke up before dawn. For a few minutes, I lay there wondering if I'd regret it, if I'd pick up my phone out of habit, only to feel the familiar sting of silence. But instead, I felt a strange calm. Like the ache had finally settled into something I could carry. I made coffee one-handed and sat at the kitchen table where I'd signed 1,000 checks and filled out countless permission slips. For the first time in decades, I looked at my life and asked myself what I wanted without thinking about who else would benefit. The question felt selfish, but it also felt like breathing after too long underwater. The phone didn't ring. No apologetic messages arrived. And I began to understand that nothing was coming. No rescue, no reconciliation, no moment when my children would stand on my porch with flowers and say, "We're sorry we made you feel unimportant." They weren't thinking of me at all. The day stretched long and quiet. I made soup and read a book, the hours folding into one another like pages in a story I didn't remember starting. But around dusk, I caught myself staring at the framed photo on the bookshelf. Evan and Rachel at Rachel's wedding, both beaming. My heart squeezed tight. Because even after everything, a part of me still wanted to believe they were better than this, that I hadn't loved them all those years for nothing. But love doesn't excuse everything, and it certainly doesn't mean you owe someone your dignity. I rose and walked to my file cabinet, the same dented metal thing I'd kept since Frank and I bought the house. I pulled open the bottom drawer and took out the thick manila folder labeled simply Estate. Inside were bank statements, insurance papers, the deed to my house, every piece of my life they'd assumed belonged to them someday. I remembered the last conversation I'd had with Evan about my will. He'd laughed, warm and certain, and said, "Well, you know, Mom, someday it'll all come back around to us." As though my life's work was just a holding pattern until they could inherit it. I'd nodded back then. Because it felt easier. Because I thought that was love. Quietly preparing to leave something behind for them. But as I sat there with those documents spread across my table, I realized that maybe the most loving thing I could do now was to stop enabling them. To stop giving them reasons to treat me like a faucet they could turn on when they were thirsty and shut off when they were full. I called my attorney the next morning. His secretary sounded surprised to hear from me. It had been years since I last updated anything, but Mr. Callahan got on the line within minutes. "Margaret," he said gently, "how can I help you today?" I swallowed, my throat dry. "I need to make some changes," I said. My voice didn't waver. I'd like to remove my children as primary beneficiaries. He paused, maybe waiting for me to change my mind. When I didn't, he asked, "Would you like to designate alternates?" "Yes," I said, and as the words left my mouth, I felt something crack open in my chest, a space I hadn't realized was waiting to be filled. I want the trust to go to my grandchildren, but not their parents. And not until the children are adults. He was quiet for a moment. "I understand." We arranged an appointment. He said he'd prepare everything. I hung up and felt my heartbeat settle. The quiet rebellion had begun, not out of spite, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted peace. I wanted the rest of my days to be mine, not a ledger they assumed would someday be theirs. That afternoon, I sat by the window with my tea, still one-handed, and wrote 2 letters I never planned to send, one to Evan, one to Rachel. In them, I explained how it felt to be treated like an inconvenience, how their silence had spoken more clearly than any words, how I would always love the children they had been, but could no longer pretend to respect the adults they'd become. I didn't write to hurt them. I wrote so I wouldn't forget. So if someday doubt crept in, if I wondered whether I was being too harsh, I could read my own words and remember the truth. When the sun went down, I folded the letters and tucked them into the file cabinet with the revised documents. I sat there a long time, feeling the weight of it all. The years I'd spent giving without question. The holidays I'd hosted even when I was too tired to stand. The countless sacrifices I'd made, believing that if I just kept showing up, they'd always see me. But they didn't. Not until I disappeared. That night, I slept better than I had in years. I didn't dream about them. I didn't wake up reaching for my phone. I just rested, finally, mercifully, without apology. 3 weeks passed without a word. The silence became its own kind of company. I learned how to fill the hours without checking my phone every time it buzzed. I went back to tending my roses, though I was careful not to overreach with my healing wrist. I cooked simple meals, read old novels, and let the house stay as quiet as it wanted. Some days, the loneliness crept in like a draft under the door. But even in those moments, I reminded myself I had survived worse. I had survived Frank's affair, survived the years of scraping by with 2 children and no partner. I could survive this too. Then, on a Thursday morning, the phone rang. The number flashed across the screen, unfamiliar but local. For a moment, I almost didn't answer, but something told me I needed to hear it. "Hello?" "Mom." Evan's voice. He sounded tired, older. A flicker of something, maybe guilt, maybe longing, rose up in my chest, but I didn't feed it. "Evan. Listen, I know we haven't talked, but..." He exhaled a shaky breath. "Rachel's husband was in a bad accident last night. He's in ICU. She's a mess. We're trying to figure out the bills." I closed my eyes, pressing my hand to the place under my collarbone that always ached when my heart hurt. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly. "Yeah, well," he cleared his throat. "We were hoping maybe you'd be able to help out just this once." It wasn't the request itself that made something in me harden. It was the ease with which he asked, as if nothing had happened, as if I hadn't lain in the dirt weeks earlier, trying to reach him, as if they hadn't shut me out and gone on living their lives without a backward glance. I took a breath. "Evan, when I fell and I needed help, you'd blocked me." His silence was so loud, it felt like it might crack the line between us. "I know," he said finally, his voice small. "Rachel she thought you'd been too much lately, that you'd get over it." I swallowed the burn at the back of my throat. Too much. That's what I'd become to them, an obligation to be managed, a voice to mute when it didn't suit them. "I see," I whispered. "Mom, please, we need you." I thought of every time I'd answered that call, every time I'd said, "Of course," even when it hurt, even when it cost me more than I could admit. I thought about the night after Frank left, when Evan was just a boy crying in my arms because he didn't understand why his father had chosen someone else. I'd promised him then that I would never leave, that he would never have to question my love. But love is not the same as sacrifice, and sacrifice is not the same as self-erasure. "I'm sorry about Rachel's husband," I said quietly. "Truly I am, but I can't help you." "Mom," his voice sharpened. "This is serious." "I know." There was a long pause. "Is this about money? Because if it is, we'll pay you back." I almost laughed. That old hollow promise. The same one I'd heard 100 times. "It's not about money," I said. "It's about respect." He started to say something, maybe a protest, maybe another excuse, but I didn't wait to hear it. I pressed the button to end the call and set the phone down on the table. My hands were trembling. My heart felt too big for my chest. A half hour later, Rachel showed up on my porch. She didn't knock at first, just stood there, her arms folded, her eyes red from crying. Finally, she rapped her knuckles against the glass. I opened the door, but I didn't invite her in. "Mom, are you really going to do this?" she demanded, her voice cracking. You're punishing us when we're already hurting." I looked at her, my daughter, the baby I'd rocked to sleep so many nights, the young woman I'd supported through every bad decision, every heartbreak. And for the first time, I saw her not as my child, but as an adult who had made her own choices. "No," I said calmly. "I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "After everything we've done for you," she hissed. I felt something inside me break, something that had been clinging to hope. "After everything you've done?" My voice was soft, but it held an edge I'd never allowed before. "Rachel, when did you last call me just to ask how I was? When did you last thank me for any of it?" She looked away, jaw tightening. "I'm sorry about your husband," I said again, "but I can't be the person you only remember when you need something." She opened her mouth, closed it. For a second, I saw a flicker of regret, but she turned and walked down the steps without another word. I watched her go, my hand resting on the doorframe. My heart ached, but I knew this was the only way forward. The final straw had been laid across my back, and I wouldn't carry it anymore. I closed the door and locked it behind her. The quiet settled in again. An empty house, an empty phone, and for once, I didn't feel ashamed. I felt free. The days after Rachel left were quiet in that way only an old house can be. Every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the furnace sounding like a memory trying to crawl back inside me. I filled my hours with small tasks, folding laundry, trimming the rose bushes, organizing old photo albums. Each chore was a way to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't wander to the questions that had no good answers. In the evenings, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, watching the neighborhood go on about its business. Children on bicycles, couples walking dogs, porch lights flickering on one by one. And every night I promised myself that I would not pick up the phone to see if they'd called. I'd spent too many years reaching across the same canyon, only to find the other side empty. But some habits die harder than others. On the 5th day, I broke my own promise. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my messages. Nothing from Evan, nothing from Rachel, just a handful of grocery coupons and an email from the library about overdue books. My heart sank, even though I'd expected exactly this. I set the phone face down and pressed my palm over my chest. That old ache again, the one that had become so familiar it almost felt like an organ I'd grown. I whispered to the quiet, "I'm done. I mean it." And I wanted to believe it was true. The next morning, I opened the front door to get the paper and nearly stepped on it. A pale blue envelope resting on the doormat. My name was written across it in the wobbly, careful print I knew by heart. Lily, my youngest granddaughter, just 10 years old, always scribbling notes and making little crafts. For a second, I just held the envelope, afraid to open it. Afraid it would be a scolding in disguise, some attempt by Rachel to shame me through Lily's innocent words. But then I felt something deeper, a flicker of hope I hadn't dared to feel in weeks. I carried it to the kitchen and sat down before I peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, the top corner decorated with a tiny heart sticker. "Dear Grandma, Mom and Dad are really mad at you. They keep saying you don't care about us anymore, but I don't think that's true. I miss you a lot. I wish you would come over. Can I still come see you? Please don't be sad. Love, Lily." By the time I finished reading, my vision had blurred with tears. I pressed the paper to my chest, rocking slightly in my chair like I used to when the kids were little. My heart felt raw and clean, like a wound that had finally started to heal. Because even if Evan and Rachel had chosen to shut me out, someone still saw me. Someone still remembered the love that had built this family in the first place. I picked up the phone and dialed Rachel's house number, fully expecting it to go to voicemail. But after 2 rings, Lily answered in a whisper, as if she knew she was doing something she shouldn't. "Hello? Lily, it's Grandma." I heard her little intake of breath. "Hi. Hi, sweetheart." My voice cracked. "Thank you for your letter." There was a pause. "You're not mad at me?" "Oh, no." I wiped my eyes. "I could never be mad at you." "Can I still come over?" she asked again, her voice so small it nearly broke me. "You can come over whenever you like," I said, "any time." I heard her sigh, a soft sound of relief that made something in me unlock. "I miss you," she whispered. "I miss you too." We made plans for her to come by that Saturday. Just the thought of it warmed me in a way nothing else had since that awful day in the garden. When I hung up, I found myself smiling for the first time in weeks. I spent the next 2 days getting ready. I washed the guest sheets and stocked the kitchen with Lily's favorite snacks: strawberry yogurt, graham crackers, little cartons of chocolate milk. I set out the board games we used to play when she was smaller, and I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies with raisins because she always told me they tasted like hugs. Saturday morning came bright and warm. I was waiting by the window when Rachel's husband's car pulled up to the curb. Lily got out alone, carrying her little pink overnight bag. She looked up and waved shyly. When she reached the porch, I opened the door and pulled her into my arms. She hugged me tight, her face buried in my shoulder. "I knew you still loved me," she mumbled. "Oh, Lily," I said, pressing my cheek to her hair. "You never had to wonder." We spent the day together like nothing had changed, baking, playing games, sitting in the garden while she told me about school and her friends and the book she was reading. For those precious hours, it was just us. No judgment, no bitterness, just the simple, honest love between a grandmother and her granddaughter. And that night, as she fell asleep on the couch with her hand in mine, I realized something important. Even when everything else is taken from you, the small bonds you've built with care can survive. They can save you. Because love doesn't vanish just because someone else stops believing in it. When I woke up the next morning, Lily was still asleep on the couch, her hand curled against her cheek, the blanket pulled up to her chin. For a moment, I just sat in the armchair across from her, watching her breathe. The soft rise and fall of her chest, the innocence of it. I thought about all the years I'd spent believing that the measure of a good mother was endurance, that if you just kept giving, your money, your time, your patience, someday your children would understand. They'd look back and see you standing there, arms open, and realize you'd been the foundation all along. But the truth is, some people never see it. Not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't willing to look. I made us breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice. When Lily woke up, she padded into the kitchen, her hair wild and her eyes still puffy with sleep. She smiled at me, and in that moment, it didn't matter that her parents hadn't called. Didn't matter that my phone sat silent on the counter like a monument to all the times I'd been ignored. We ate together, just the two of us, the way it had always been before everything got so complicated. After breakfast, Lily packed her little bag and I walked her to the front door. Before she left, she turned to me, her voice very serious. "Grandma, I don't care what Mom and Dad say. I'm going to keep coming to see you." I felt something warm bloom in my chest. "You can always come here," I told her. "You don't need anyone's permission." She hugged me so tight I had to close my eyes against the tears. When her dad's car pulled up, she waved from the back seat, and I stood on the porch until they were out of sight. After she was gone, the house felt quieter again, but not the lonely, accusing quiet it had been before. This time, it felt like a pause, like a space I could finally fill with something better than regret. I knew then that I was ready to draw a line in the sand that no one could smudge out again. I called Mr. Callahan and confirmed that all the paperwork was in order: the revised will, the trust for my grandchildren, the removal of Evan and Rachel as beneficiaries. He cleared his throat before he hung up. "You sound lighter, Margaret," he said gently. I smiled. "I am." The next Saturday, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years. I invited a handful of friends and neighbors over for a little dinner party in my backyard. Not to prove anything to Evan or Rachel, but to remind myself that my life was still rich with people who saw me as more than an obligation. I spent the morning arranging tables under the maple tree Frank had planted the year we moved in. I strung up a line of soft white lights and set out mismatched chairs. By late afternoon, the yard looked like something out of a magazine, simple, welcoming, true. Mrs. Kent brought her famous deviled eggs. My old co-worker, Carol, came with a peach cobbler. Even Mr. Callahan and his wife stopped by to say hello. As the sun set, we sat around the table telling stories, laughing in the easy way that only happens when no one is pretending. At one point, Carol reached across the table and took my hand. "I hope you know you deserve this, Margaret," she said softly. "All of it." I didn't have words big enough to answer her, so I just squeezed her hand. Later, when the guests had gone and the dishes were washed, I sat alone under the string lights, a warm breeze rustling the branches overhead. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. It was a message from Evan. "Mom, we really need to talk about what you've done. It's not fair to the family." I stared at the words for a long time. Once I would have rushed to explain myself. I would have apologized, tried to smooth it over. I would have believed it was my job to carry everyone's disappointment so no one had to feel it but me. But not anymore. I set the phone face down and picked up my tea. I took a long sip, tasting the peace I'd earned one quiet decision at a time. For the first time in decades, I felt certain that I hadn't lost my family. I'd only lost the illusion that they valued me the way I deserved. And in that truth, there was freedom. I looked up at the sky, deep and endless, and smiled to myself. Let them call me selfish. Let them call me ungrateful. Let them gossip about the inheritance they'd always assumed would be theirs. I was done being the woman who never said no. I was done proving my worth. And when I finally stood to go inside, I didn't look back once.